Good evening all and welcome to day 2 of Paranormal Week over here on Mortis Media. Tonight I have an absolutely thrilling collection of Ouija board scary stories and what happens to those who use them so inadvisedly. And joining me tonight is Jordan Group Horror, and if you enjoy his work you'll be able to find a link down below and at the end cards if you would like to hear more from him. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. When I was 14 years old, I was at my friend Tyler's house for a sleepover with my other friends Jaden and Tony. One of them had gotten a Ouija board from another friend, and being young children, we thought it would be a really fantastic idea to use it. So we placed it on the table and waited until around 12:30 before actually using it. Since it was our first time, we read through the rules carefully and followed them as best we could. At first, nothing happened. We asked if there were any spirits around, and it took about 3 minutes before the planchette moved. I honestly thought one of my friends was messing with me, but it turned out they weren't. I can't remember the name it gave us, and honestly I'd rather not know it now anyway. We asked it simple questions to prove it was real, like what time it was, and it answered 12:53 a.m. When I checked my phone, it was exactly right. We didn't ask anything disrespectful like how it died, because we didn't want to upset it. Instead, we asked what kind of spirit it was, and it spelled out B-A-D. Moments after that, we started hearing noises coming from the basement, banging, and then the basement doors started opening on their own before slamming shut. I began feeling sick with fear. My whole body was shaking, and the atmosphere in the room was becoming very uncomfortable. Then we looked back at the board and it spelled out, I see you. Right after that, we heard a loud bang, and that was enough for all of us. We ended the session immediately. I called my mum to come get me, and my friends called their parents too. Tyler stayed at his grandma's place for a while after that. When I got home, I was exhausted, so I went straight to bed, but around 4:30 a.m., I woke up to a faint whisper, I see you. That's when I opened my eyes and saw something that made my stomach drop. Across from my bed at the window, there was a shadow figure staring in at me. My bed faced the window, so the second I opened my eyes, it was right there in front of me. I screamed, jumped out of bed, and ran to tell my mum and dad. But by the time they checked, there was nothing there. They asked me what happened. And when I told them about the sleepover and the Ouija board, they were visibly upset. Even so, they had a priest come to bless me, my friends, and the house, just to make sure nothing followed us. I'm 18 now, and still remember that night clearly, and haven't touched a Ouija board or anything paranormal since, and do not plan to start anytime soon. I have a story to share. This story my mum told me a while back. Her personal experience with a Ouija board that still gives me chills whenever I think about it. Now, my mum is not the type to make up wild tales. She is a straightforward and practical person that dismisses most ghost stories as errant nonsense. She only opened up about this because I mentioned wanting to use a Ouija board to try contacting my younger brother, who tragically passed away a few years prior. She insisted I hear what happened to her first, swearing it freaked her out enough to steer clear of them forever. And honestly, after she laid it all out, I dropped the idea completely, too afraid to even look at one. This took place back when she was in high school, during a typical late-night adventure with a group of close friends in a small town in Iowa. It was a humid summer night, and they had been cruising around in someone's beat-up old truck with the windows down, discussing teenage drama. Well, one friend, a guy known for collecting oddities, pulled out a battered Ouija board that he kept stashed in the back, made of authentic wood and with faded letters. They spotted an abandoned barn off the road and decided it would be the perfect place to play with this antique board. On a whim, they stopped and decided to give it a try, piling out of the truck and entering the barn that smelled of damp hay. They noticed several rusted, scattered tools all inside the barn. But from the moment my mum walked in, she immediately felt a bad vibe and a prickling at the back of her neck. She hesitated at the door for a moment, telling them she wanted no part of this. But the group turned on her with teasing. "Come on, don't be a sissy." They ribbed her, insisting it would not work properly if not everyone was present. No one left out. Peer pressure, I'm afraid to say, won out, but she laid down the condition that they could only play if no one asked anything sketchy or dangerous, nothing about death or the future that could tempt dark answers. The guys obviously laughed it off, promising to keep it light and basic. Reluctantly, she knelt down with them on the dusty floor, and they formed a loose circle around the board, which was propped on their knees and a feed sack. They placed their fingers lightly on the planchette and waited. At first, nothing happened. They started with a safe opener. "Is anyone here with us?" But were met with nothing. So they tried, "What's your name?" The planchette stayed stubbornly still, barely twitching under their collective touch. The tension built as time dragged on, and nothing was happening. Then Terry, one of the bolder guys, broke the promise without warning. "Which one of us will be the first to die?" he asked, half joking. My mum's hand flew off the board instantly, her face flushing with anger. "That's not funny, Terry. You promised no creepy stuff." She was about to leave, but the group erupted in screams for her to put her hand back, swearing it was harmless fun, and they needed everyone for it to work. Grudgingly, she complied as she put her fingers on the planchette again. The responses came. It jerked to life under their fingers, sliding across the board to spell out 2 initials: CJ. Everyone froze. CJ was right there in the circle, a quiet kid with a twin brother also present. No one spoke his last 4 name aloud that night, but they recognized it instantly. Gasps rippled through the group, accusations flying as the fingers lifted off the planchette. Someone pushed it. Surely someone only spelt it because it was the shortest name. My mum pulled away again, pissed off and unnerved. They hastily said goodbye to whatever they contacted, and everyone started blaming each other for moving the planchette. Terry swore innocence. CJ tried playing it cool. But it's never easy to be told you're going to die first. By morning, most people thought it was probably just a group prank. And years passed, high school ended, jobs started, and everyone's lives diverged. That way they tend to do once you grow out of your childhood phase and become an adult. My mum moved on with her own life, marrying my dad, raising us kids, and rarely ever thinking back to that night. Then, the news hit one night. CJ, the twin from that night, died in a single car crash on a gravel road they used to cruise. He had been driving alone late at night, veered into a ditch at high speed, and the truck was mangled beyond recognition. He was the first from their group to go, the absolute first, matching the board's prediction down to the initials. And when the police investigated, they discovered the lug nuts were loosened deliberately before the drive, This was no accident. Someone had tampered with his truck. However, no suspects were ever named, but the eerie precision struck my mum. She pieced it together one day when I brought up my brother. She explained everything, and she wondered if this was something the entity could just see happening in the future, or if it was a promise that CJ had been targeted, and it made sure to deliver on its promise of him suffering an early end. Terry felt guilty for years, she said, avoiding the topic entirely. The twin brother still lives locally, but they've lost touch. My mum thought it would be insensitive to ask if he remembered that day, and she swore off Ouija boards completely after that, warning every relative, me included, to never tempt those same forces. I have been dealing with spirits for as long as I can remember. Sometimes they're harmless, but other times they're not. There was one shadow figure I used to refer to as Mr. Top Hat Man. At first, he didn't seem threatening, but over time I realized he wasn't good for me, so I told him to leave me alone. Last year, I started noticing paranormal activity in my house, things moving, noises, and the feeling that something was there with me. I told it to leave me be, began reading Bible verses aloud, and hung a cross over the door to my room. This year, my friend and I started joking around about ghost hunting and decided a Ouija board purchase would be sensible. The first time we contacted someone who claimed to be a 9-year-old girl called Madeline. She seemed friendly at first and matched our energy. When we used the board again later with one of our guy friends, she refused to speak until he removed his fingers from the planchette. She said he didn't like men because a man had something to do with her death. Both sessions ended properly, and we made sure to say goodbye. But after that, things started getting worse. My electronics began acting up out of nowhere. Lights flickered and I kept hearing noises in my room, and I started feeling weight shifting on the bed when I was trying to sleep, and there'd be no one there to do that. Not to mention the feeling of being watched. I talked to my stepdad about it, and since he dealt with Mr. Top Hat Man before, he said this didn't feel like him, because that spirit usually made itself known more directly, and I started wondering what I should do next. A few weeks later, my friend and I used the Ouija board again while another friend watched. He didn't want to participate, but he was okay with observing. We had started to suspect maybe we were moving the planchette ourselves without realizing it, so we asked if any spirits wanted to speak with us and made it clear that they did not have permission to attach themselves to us. Madeline came through again. This time I didn't trust her. I didn't believe she was really a little girl. She seemed darker than that. When we asked how she was doing, she said she was mad. So I asked if she was mad at me specifically, and she said yes. I didn't ask why because I already had a feeling it might have something to do with the cross necklace I was wearing, as I hadn't worn it during the first 2 sessions. I asked if she had been the one messing with my TV while I was painting my nails, and she said yes. After that, I told her again that we were willing to talk, but not to attach herself to me. She said she was mad again, so we ended the session and said goodbye. Our other friend was freaked out afterwards and said it didn't look like either of us were moving the planchette much at all. A few minutes later, I was washing my hands and looked in the mirror. I noticed 3 scratches on the side of my neck. By the next morning, there were more scratches on my neck and chest, near where my cross necklace had been, and I took pictures of them. We haven't used the board since, but I keep thinking about it. I wanted to know why she seemed to focus on me instead of my other friend. Maybe it's because I've dealt with spirits my whole life. Maybe it's because I believe in them so strongly. I just don't know why it would be me. My honest suggestion is to stop using the board completely and avoid inviting anything else in. Whatever this is, the safest thing is to stop engaging with it, especially if the activity seems to intensify afterwards. I want to start off by confessing I am an atheist, and I do not believe in ghosts and/or the supernatural, nor do I believe in demons, angels, etc. My wife, however, does, and she was born a Christian, is still a believer, and while she does not attend church, her parents are active churchgoers, and from time to time, we both attend for special occasions. Despite being an atheist, I'm not anti-religion. I want to point out, because in the context of what I'm about to share, I think it's relevant and also good for you to know. I am not someone who points towards an experience as paranormal without good reason. Also, my wife is very much into horror. She loves horror movies, horror books, and she runs a business creating horror curiosities, Ouija boards, as well as Victorian fairground-themed dolls. Again, this provides additional context for what I'm about to share. Back in 2016, we moved to a house in South Staffordshire, England. The house was roughly 100 years old at the time. A few weeks in, we started noticing bizarre things happening. We'd be sitting in the front room watching TV, and then we'd hear footsteps or what sounded like footsteps coming from upstairs. It was so loud we'd stop the TV or whatever we were doing, listening, and then we'd hear it again. I'd go and investigate, only for there to be nothing and no one upstairs, of course. It could only be floorboards creaking. That was the only logical conclusion. It's an old house, floorboards are going to creak. Then we'd wake up, and picture frames would be crooked. The lid of the bin would be loose or even off, and lights would be on. You could argue there are logical explanations for these things. Anything could have caused a picture frame to move. Maybe one of us left the lid on the bin loose and not securely, leaving it without realizing it wasn't uncommon. Then came the night terrors. My wife would wake up in the middle of the night screaming, adamant she'd seen someone in the room, or even floating above her head. It could be argued she was dreaming vividly, so much so she was convinced it was all real. I could go on, but the point here is every paranormal-like activity in the house, there was always an argument to rationalize what was going on. In our dining room, we had an old-fashioned bureau, and on the bureau was a sculpture of a hand. We'd put mail for one another in between the fingers, or if we received the card for a birthday or whatever, it would go in between the fingers for a while. To be honest, most of the time, I wouldn't even notice. One evening my wife asked me if I'd seen the card I got her for when she got her master's degree. She said she had it on the hand sculpture but it's not there anymore, and asked if I had moved it. Like I said, I hardly noticed her stuff, and I never knew where she put the card. So we searched the entire room. I even lifted the bureau so my wife could look underneath it, but it was gone. Nowhere to be seen. I joked, saying maybe the ghost took it, and this became a running joke. Whenever anything happened, we would blame it on the ghost. Anyway, we moved out and agreed the card would have to show up at some point. Weeks passed and nothing. The car wasn't anywhere to be seen. I'd even forgotten about it. It was just coming up to my wife's birthday, and part of her gift was bringing the horror obsessive that she is. I got us tickets to a ghost hunting tour at the old haunted pub. We'd seen a few of these ghost hunts. Most of the time it's a load of nonsense, but it's a laugh, and we met some nice, if not eccentric people. Overall, it was a good experience, even if we were standing in the dark for most of the time calling out for a ghost that isn't really there. So we go to this ghost hunt. A few things go on and then we all split into little groups, with a Ouija board. I'm dubious. I had done these on ghost hunts before, and because everyone felt like they wanted to get spooked or experience something. It always felt like the glass was being moved on purpose, and I felt no difference this time, even when the glass came to me, when we'd asked who the spirit was going to speak to. So I asked questions that I can't even remember asking. I asked if the new house was haunted, and it said yes. If this character was a friendly ghost, and the glass moved to yes. I asked if this ghost stole my wife's card, and the glass moved to yes. I asked if she could have it back, and it said yes. I swear on my mother's life. We came home a few hours later, and it was in the middle of the dining room on the floor. This is peak, and weeks after it was lost. So the floor had been swept, hoovered, and despite that, we searched so thoroughly for it, we would have noticed, or my wife definitely would have noticed for sure. This was over 8 years ago now. We've moved, we've bought a cottage that's over 150 years old, but there's been zero activity, thankfully. But I can't explain or find a logical or rational explanation for what happened to me that night. It was really bizarre, and I'm curious to hear what other people think of it as well.
A bit of backstory. I'm the youngest of 4 brothers, all a year apart. At this time, I was about 9 years old, and our family friend was spending the night at our place. We lived in a 2-story house with a basement. Our mom was single and dating a lot at that time, so on this particular night, she was away. We had seen how to make a Ouija board on an episode of a show called Mystery Hunters on YTV, a Canadian kids channel. So, we decided it would be a fun thing to try while we had the house to ourselves. We cut up an old cardboard box and made a Ouija board out of it. We put felt on the bottom of the triangle so it would slide better, and it worked pretty well. We all tried putting our fingers on the triangle at once and asking questions, but we got no response. We each tried putting our fingers on the triangle by ourselves and still got nothing. Then, one of my brothers and I asked a question like, "Is there a demon here?" And the triangle started to move. We looked at each other, and the expression on our faces showed that it was neither of us moving it. We immediately got scared and ran into the kitchen. When we got into the kitchen, we heard a crash from the living room. It sounded like our TV fell off the wall unit. We ran back into the living room to check, but nothing was there. After that, we decided to grab the Bible and read. We were a religious family at the time. The first words we read, in unison, were, "God's people are doomed." Frightened by this, we turned on the TV. We saw it was Dave Chappelle, so we assumed it was going to be something funny. But then, when the audio began, the first words from Dave were, "And all the people died." The audience started laughing, and then it went to commercials. Freaked out by both of these things, we started crying. We all ran upstairs screaming to my oldest brother's bedroom. When we got up the stairs and into his room, we heard footsteps that sounded exactly like ours run up the stairs after us. Immediately, I assumed it was my brothers or one of our friends coming up late. But when we realized we were all in the room and no one had passed by the door, we began to panic. We held each other, freaking out. Hard to say if we heard anything after this point, so this was the last that happened for now. About 2 hours later, me and my brother, the bravest of the 4, decided that this might all be in our heads. We decided to play video games on my mom's computer in her office. Diablo 2, to be exact. The door to her office had no handle, so my brother pushed the door open. Immediately after he pushed it open, it slammed back on his arm. And all the way from the basement, we heard clear, loud laughter. The only way I can describe it is the sound of a witch. It echoed through the entire house, all the way upstairs. At that point, we ran down the stairs, out the door, and to my grandmother's house. which was down the street. We waited there for my mom to come home. I'm not sure if she completely believed us, but this was back when we were kids. I'm 23 years old now, and this story sticks out as one of the only and craziest paranormal experiences I've ever had.
I learnt about Ouija boards when I was around 10 or 11. A friend told me his sister had one, and when she tried to throw it away, it kept on showing up again. Now, as an 11-year-old, that fascinated me, so I asked my evangelical mother if I could get one. You can probably guess what she said, but naturally that only piqued my curiosity more. Well, a few years later, I was at Kmart and bought a Milton Bradley board without telling anyone. I took it home and used it myself, not knowing much about the rules people talk about now. Looking back, I probably broke several of them. For a start, I didn't say goodbye when I was done, and asked it when I was going to die. It said I'd be around 72. What I do remember clearly is that the board moved on its own. I was the only one there, and the movement felt mechanical. Not like I was guiding it unconsciously or anything, but it was moving independently. One thing it told me was the name of my future wife. It started spelling out CHR, and then I lost track for a moment, but it kept on going, and it ended on an N, and then started moving back and forth between N and yes. It kept doing that until I finally lifted my hands off the board. Years later, I met a woman called Christian, and we got married. We're still married now, in fact. I didn't think much of that Ouija board session at the time, but later while watching Paranormal Activity, it suddenly clicked in my head, and I had this jolt of recognition. That was the first time I really thought, wait, did that thing actually tell me my wife's name years ago? I also asked the entity where it was from, and it very clearly answered, Nod. I had no idea what that meant at the time, and had never heard the word used in that way. Years later, I came across a D&D-style storybook called The Land of Nod, and thought maybe it had something to do with vampires or something equally strange. Most recently, I looked it up, and found the biblical reference Nod as the place east of Eden, where Cain was sent after killing Abel. The idea that it could be tied to a place associated with exile and darkness makes the answer feel a lot more unsettling in hindsight. The strange thing is, the entity never seemed angry or hostile. I didn't have a bad experience afterwards, but the fact that it happened so clearly shook me enough that I never worked up the courage to use a Ouija board again. A lot of people later told me I had broken every rule in the book, which only made me less interested in trying it a second time. I'm generally skeptical about these kind of things, and I'm not into tarot, palm reading, or any of that. I'm a practicing Christian, so I don't want to have anything to do with it. But that one experience did leave me open to the possibility that some people really do contact something through it. Whether that's the spiritual realm, deception, or something else entirely, I cannot say. But I still think about the answer Nod, and the weird back and forth between N and yes. Those two details specifically have stuck in my mind for the longest time, and I honestly don't know what to make of them. I am 18, and had a small party on January 1st with 3 of my friends. We started talking about the paranormal, and since we had differing views, we got hyped up and decided to try a Ouija-style setup without an actual board. We used the letters A to C, numbers 1 to 9, yes and no, 5 candles, and a salt pentagram drawn around us. When we started, nothing much happened at first. There was a little bit of movement, so we thought we were accidentally moving it ourselves. But then things went crazy. 2 of the candles started acting completely wild. One had the letter X, and the other had the letter M on it. The biggest thing was that the shot glass shot directly towards the letter X, so it basically got pushed from the table. It got so intense that my friends decided to stop the session. Even though I didn't want to stop, they asked me to end it 4 times before I finally relinquished the planchette. Afterwards, we broke the glass we'd used as a planchette. In the aftermath, 2 of us are really convinced something was there, and 1 friend is still unsure. My bigger problem is that, after it happened, I looked up what X means in this kind of context, and it's only found bad results. I'm worried. Can someone maybe explain to me what I went through? I had an experience once at a friend's house that I still don't have a clean explanation for, even though I've always been skeptical of anything paranormal. My friend Megan lived in a house near a lake, and there was a local story about someone who had drowned there 3 years before. She also liked to tell people that her Ouija board was from Salem. Then something else happened that day that didn't fit as neatly. From somewhere across the house, we heard 3 distinct stomps. They were spaced out, like someone was wearing boots across a hardwood floor. This house was older, and I tried telling myself it could have been something structural, or maybe someone had just come through the back and none of us had heard the open street sign. We were already at the edge as it was, and then a few seconds later, there were 3 knocks from inside the cabaret directly under the location. Right next to where we were sitting, the cabinet was closed and filled with electronics. Boxes, cables, DVD players, as well as other things. The sound wasn't muffled or vague, it was clear, like someone knocking from the inside against the wood. I was sitting closest to it, and at that point I felt like I was starting to panic. I told myself we needed to stop, no one argue, and we moved the planchette off the board and ended the session immediately. Afterwards, the mood in the room completely changed. Everyone seemed uneasy. People were quieter, and there was a great sense of discomfort that stuck around for a while. I've gone over it a lot since, trying to come up with explanations. Everyone seemed very uneasy, people were quieter, and there was a general sense of discomfort in the air. That part is what made me question whether someone had been faking it, because if they were, they didn't stop acting after. I've gone over it a lot since then, trying to come up with explanations. I still think the planchette movement was most likely someone pushing it. Either intentionally or without realizing it, the footsteps could have been someone in the house, or even someone outside the house that we didn't see. The only part I can't really account for is the knocking on the cabinet. There wasn't space for anyone to be there, and nothing inside it should have been able to produce that kind of sound on its own. It's the one detail that doesn't fit the explanation, and I've been trying to come up with it, but don't consider myself part of any academic group. But that's one of the few experiences where I couldn't fully explain what happened. I've used Ouija boards a lot before with my best friend, but the time we used it on this occasion was something I don't think I'll ever be able to forget. It actually happened not too long ago, on the 14th of February, around 3 a.m. It happened to be a Sunday morning, and we were at her place recording the whole thing for YouTube. We turned the lights off, lit the candles, and set the board up like we always do. At first, nothing happened, and when we asked if any spirits wanted to talk to us, we tried again. After taking a break, the planchette then moved to yes. We asked the spirit's name, and it only gave us the letter S. When we asked how old it was, it said 56. We then asked for a clear sign that it was really there. Honestly, I was already thinking it was probably just my friend moving it like I'd wondered before. But right after we asked, the door shook. Straight after. My friend and I went silent, and we both stared at the door like, what the hell is that? We shouted goodbye and moved the planchette to goodbye as fast as we could, then basically threw ourselves onto the sofa. My best friend screamed. Even after that, it still felt like something was in the room with us, so we politely asked it to leave. It didn't. The door shook again. At that point, we were both pretty much begging it to go away. We had turned the TV on earlier just to calm ourselves down because we were shaking and breathing too fast, and eventually it seemed like the moment the TV got louder, whatever was there finally left. Even after that, both of us kept feeling like something was still around for the next few days. My best friend also said she saw a shadowy figure. We're hoping to see a guy we know on Thursday who's supposed to be a psychic and be able to help us. The whole thing really shook me. I used to believe Ouija boards were just toys or fake, but after experiencing that, I think there's definitely something very real to them. Be wary with what you use. This happened during Christmas time when I was living in a hostel. Almost the entire block had gone to celebrate with their families, and only a small group of us stayed behind. On the night of the 23rd, we were drinking, playing poker, and just hanging out. After, we got bored, and a few of my friends decided to try a Ouija board, which was homemade, made of paper, and using a shot glass. I wasn't really into it, so I left the room. Later on, I came back and just sat there observing quietly. I didn't say anything or touch the board at first. One of my friends asked me to ask a question. I was skeptical, but I had a deck of cards in my pocket and thought of testing it. I told my friend to ask the board what the top card of my deck was. The glass moved and spelled out 4 of D. I immediately checked the deck. The top card was the 4 of diamonds, and I was genuinely shocked. I shuffled the deck properly, put it back, and asked it to do it again. This time, the board spelled 7 of S, spades. I checked again, and it was right. I hadn't said the card out loud, no one had touched the deck, and I wasn't guiding the movement. After that, I didn't continue and just left it there. I'm not jumping to the conclusion of it was a spirit, but I also can't fully explain how it happened twice in a row. Has anyone ever experienced anything like it, and has a solid explanation as to how?
I collect Ouija boards. I know how strange that sounds. Most people collect stamps, coins, vinyl, or posters. I should preface this by saying I have extensive knowledge of the paranormal. I've been having experiences with it since I was a child. That led me into paranormal investigation in my teens and early 20s, which coincided with when I started collecting the boards. Since then, I've amassed quite a collection, but there is one that I refuse to even keep in my house. I call it the Salem board. I used to do special effects makeup for films, and I was in Salem, Massachusetts for a job. As you've probably gathered, I'm a lover of the strange, the unusual, and all things creepy, so I was thrilled by the opportunity. I got into town a few days before filming began, so I could prep and do some sightseeing. I wandered through some of the shops and happened to walk into one that had a pretty large collection of Ouija boards. Some were vintage, some were etched glass, and some were burned wood. At the back of the shop, there was a locked display case that immediately caught my eye. Alone on the top shelf was a board that looked like the cross-section of a tree stump. It had the usual markings of a Ouija board, but they looked hand-carved into the wood, and it was covered with runes. I went to the guy behind the counter and asked how much it was. "It's not for sale," he said quietly. "Why not?" I asked. He looked back at the cabinet and then back at me. "That board is made from a tree that was used to hang witches during the Salem witch trials." I looked at him skeptically. That was a pretty tall claim, but I really did want the board. It would look great in my collection and be a cool conversation piece. Are you sure you don't want to sell it? Once again, he looked between me and the cabinet. $150 cash. No returns. I handed him the money and he walked to the cabinet to unlock it. He must have noticed the confused look on my face when he handed me the board. It doesn't come with a planchette. This board was not exactly meant to be used. I wasn't exactly sure how to respond to that, so I just said thanks and left the shop. Fast forward a few months. I'm back home in Seattle in my one-bedroom apartment, living alone. I had put the Salem board in a box in my closet, since I was waiting on a new display case and didn't really have anywhere else to put it. My closet had 2 sliding doors and a shelf on top of the bar where you'd hang clothes. The shelf was actually pretty large, so it accommodated the box with room to spare. I went to bed that night and fell asleep with the TV on. I was awoken around 3 a.m. by the sound of something hitting my closet door. I checked to make sure my ball python Kronos was still in his cage, since every time he got out, he'd try to get into my closet where the hot water heater was. I saw he was curled up under his log, so I cautiously opened the closet door and saw the box had fallen off the shelf and was now resting against the door. I was puzzled, but in my sleeplessness thought I had just not pushed it back far enough. I pushed the box back and went back to sleep. About 30 minutes later, I heard another noise from my closet, but this time, it was much louder. When I opened my eyes, I could see that one of my closet doors had been pushed outward. The box had fallen off the shelf again, but this time, it had done it with so much force that it had wedged between my clothes and the door. At this point, I was becoming a bit concerned. Instead of putting the box back on the shelf, I placed it on the floor of the closet and shut the door. When I woke up in the morning, I turned over to grab my phone off the nightstand and saw my closet door wide open. The box had been pushed out into the middle of my room. At this point, I became concerned. This was an object with a lot of emotion attached to it. A lot of anger, a lot of pain and suffering. I thought it best to keep it in a box and put the box in my storage unit. A few years go by, and my mom keeps bugging me to clean out some things from the storage unit since she needed some space for her stuff. It was in the middle of summer, and the storage unit was sweltering. I was going through boxes, aimlessly tossing things into piles, when I came across the box. The room was suddenly freezing. I took the lid off and looked down. The Salem board was sitting on top of several other Ouija boards I had acquired over the years. They had all been cracked in half down the middle. All of them except the Salem board. I stared into the box, trying to comprehend what I was looking at. These boards looked like someone had broken them over their knee. Surely not the result of a box being dropped or jostled. I removed the board from the box and placed it in a wooden chest, which I had acquired from my great-grandmother, who had considered herself to be a witch. It remains in that box to this day. I believe there are forces in this world that we will never understand. I'm sure you're wondering why I didn't get rid of the board. In a way, I feel tied to it. It called to me, and I answered. I consider myself its keeper. As long as it is with me, everyone else is safe from whoever or whatever is attached to it.
Let me give you a bit of backstory. I am currently a 26-year-old male, and this happened when I was 10 years old. My family, up until about the age of 10, was completely not religious. But around the age of 10, my parents started to become more religiously involved. Also, not sure if it matters or not, but I come from a pretty large family with 8 kids in total, and I am the 4th oldest. My family and I were grateful enough to have a summer property that we were able to get away to every single year that I could remember. This property was not just something I got to grow up with, but my mother and her grandparents too, and a long list of our cousins, my mum's cousins, aunts, uncles, you name it. They all had properties in the same location too. This specific property me and my parents and siblings stayed on was the one that was owned by my grandfather since the late 60s. All the properties in this little community were in pretty close proximity to each other, although throughout and surrounding were heavily wooded areas, so as a 10-year-old boy, it made for the perfect setting for a very creepy, spooky night here and there. The building on the property we were staying at had a little mudroom when you walked in, and it was connected to the living room with a mini kitchen and a hallway that led to 2 small bedrooms and a bathroom. On this particular night, it was only me, my brother who's only 1 year older than me, my mother, and a sister that was a few years younger, staying at the property. My mother was sleeping on the couch, my sister was sleeping on the ground right below her, and me and my brother were sleeping 7 feet away in the mudroom that was converted into a sleeping area, and we were all visible to each other. We had all gone to bed at some random point throughout the night. It must have been between 2 or 3 in the morning. When I woke up my brother, he was right next to me. So I took notice of him and glanced over to see my mum on the couch and my sister right under her. As I was laying there, I was attempting to go back to sleep when I heard the closet door open and bags like chips or pretzels, like someone rummaging through it. Where I was, the closet was directly like 3 inches around the corner to the hallway, which was probably a good 8 feet away from us, and immediately I glanced back over to my mom and my sister, and it was pretty dark. But I thought I didn't see my sister there anymore, so I figured it was just her. I laid there silently, though after a good 10 minutes of rummaging around, I glanced back up and noticed my sister was still sleeping under my mother, as she was the entire time. As you can imagine, this immediately sent me into a panic, because it was only us in the building, and all of us were still in the exact same spot. But I had clearly heard the closet door open and stuff being rummaged through. Me being a 10-year-old, I put the blanket over my head and forced myself to go back to bed. The next morning I started to express to my brother what I had experienced that night, expecting both of us to simply laugh it off. But he then proceeded to confess to me that, during that night at some point, he had been woken up as well, and he had seen a dark figure or shadow right near the corner of that hallway, and he was petrified and scared, so he forced himself to go back to bed. And honestly, I felt more scared in the morning once we'd shared the experiences than I had that night, because of the realization of something truly not of this world had happened, and he confirmed it too. I've done other things like Ouija boards, watching scary movies, other random kid stuff, so I don't know if it originated from that, or it was its own separate thing. But I know for a fact I encountered something paranormal that night. Last night I went on a ghost hunt, and honestly came away looking at things completely differently. I didn't really expect to experience anything, but we did, and I can't properly get my head around it. We went to an old orphanage that later became an asylum before eventually closing down, so the place already had a pretty chilling feel to it before anything else happened. The first thing that stood out happened in one of the wards. We were speaking to a man called Dick, and he immediately made it clear that he didn't like someone on the table. He told us to piss off, which actually made us laugh at the time. After that, we were allowed to wander around on our own, so my partner and I took a different Ouija board with us and went back into the same room. It was just the 2 of us sitting there, and this time Dick came through the board again. He told us how many children he had, and how many siblings he had, and then he said he was alone and lonely. That honestly upset me more than I expected. We said our goodbyes, and he said it back. We decided to move into another room, but nothing happened there, so we didn't give up. We went into another ward and found an office, put the board down and started another session. This time someone called Samuel came through. We couldn't work out if he was 7, 8 or 78, but when we asked him if he wanted to tell us something, he spelled out run. After that, we said goodbye to Samuel and left. I can't quite explain it all. There were other things that happened too, but that whole night really changed how I looked at things and left me with a lot more to think about. I grew up in several haunted houses, shaped by a mother deeply immersed in the paranormal. She loved ghost stories, EVP recordings, and even hosted seances for fun. Her passion rubbed off on me early, turning Ouija board sessions into a regular pastime despite the warnings. By the time I was 18, I had played dozens of times. But one session in our rural cottage changed everything. And it started with the phantom known as Fred. The cottage sat isolated down a winding dirt road driveway, surrounded by dense woods that swallowed sound at night. The main structure held my windowless room and my sister's, both cramped and shadowy. Add-ons extended it, my brother's room jutting sideways, and my mum's tacked on the back, separated by an oppressive narrow hallway. Well, one quiet evening my sister and I set up our homemade Ouija board on the kitchen table, which was made from letters cut from newspaper magazine scraps and arranged in neat rows. There would be a shot glass turned upside down that would function as our planchette, its rim scraping faintly as we placed the fingers and asked, "Is anyone here?" The glass twitched and slid to F-R-E-D. Fred. Sounded harmless. I grabbed the pencil to transcribe and scribbled down each letter as the questions flowed. How he died, where he lived, what his favorite color was. Minutes in, the pencil vanished. I assumed I'd dropped it, but when we looked, it was not under the table, or under the chairs, or anywhere on the floor. Heart picking up, I asked the board, "Where's the pencil?" The glass moved. M-O-M-S-R-O-O-M. That's when we got chills. Mum's room. It was at the end of the hallway. And the board carried on. G-O-G-E-T-I-T. Hell no, I muttered. We then began to get a bit mouthy with the board and playful, but we decided it would be a good idea to end the session early. The next morning, everyone left to do their own thing, and I stayed home alone because it was my day off. I was sleeping in my room, which didn't have any windows, and always felt claustrophobic. I was half asleep and half aware of what was going on around me. But I was acutely aware of two people talking nearby. I assumed it was my mum and sister, and remember hearing one of them say, "Take the blankets, he's sleeping." And that's the moment I felt the blankets be pulled right off me. That snapped me awake instantly, but I couldn't move. I was in sleep paralysis. I could hear nothing more than this horrible silence, but all I could do was move my eyes. I tried to scream but couldn't, and then out of the corner of my eye I saw something glowing. When I looked towards it, I saw a large, round, pale white face floating beside my bed, which was staring directly at me. The eyes were dark and empty, and I was so scared I actually felt tears come out my eyes. I lay there looking at it, completely frozen for what felt like forever, probably around 10 seconds. Then it blinked, and after that it floated up into the corner of the room and vanished. The second it disappeared, I got control of my body and bolted out of my bed and ran outside just to leave the house. A few days later, I was up late watching television in the living room. It's important to note that my bedroom, my brother's room, and my sister's room all opened off into that same space, and my mum was asleep in her room while my siblings were out. I was already on edge from what had happened the other day, so the house was already feeling stranger than usual when I heard this huge crash from my sister's room. It was so loud I nearly jumped out of my skin. I stood up and moved to the middle of the living room, staring at her door, half expecting it to open and something to come barreling out, but nothing did. Not even 5 seconds later, I heard the exact same kind of crash from my brother's room. That was enough for me. I ran to wake my mum and told her she needed to check what was going on because I was not doing it myself. I stood behind her while she opened my sister's door first. I was expecting maybe an animal had gotten inside. When we looked in, a few of the ceiling tiles had been torn loose and were lying around the room. One was on the bed, and 2 more were on the floor. They were scattered several feet apart, like they had fallen from different places all at once. I tried to explain it myself as just an old house being old. But then we checked my brother's room. His ceiling had also fallen, but his was different. That section was made of insulation and plywood screwed into the roof studs, and somehow the plywood had detached and dropped down too. 2 completely separate rooms, built with different materials on a dry summer night, both suffering ceiling failures within minutes of each other. I mean, it could happen hypothetically, but it just didn't seem likely, and I couldn't make sense of it then and still can't now. Maybe it was the house settling or dodgy construction, and perhaps I was already paranoid after the Ouija board session, but the timing of everything was simply too bizarre. I had asked a ghost named Fred if he wanted to kill me, and not long after that, the house seemed to be falling apart around me. I no longer mess with things that we don't understand, especially if they can talk back. When I was 13 years old, I played Ouija with my cousin of the same age. I didn't believe in it at all, but she swore to me that the house was haunted, which her mum claimed as well. They both had stories of doors opening by themselves, despite all the windows being closed, footsteps being heard from the rooftop, and objects randomly disappearing and reappearing. It was nothing bad per se, just the odd, strange phenomena. Anyway, that day my cousin wanted to prove to me that there was actually a thing happening in the house. We sat on the floor in the basement and pulled out the Ouija board. We placed our hands on the planchette and said, "Ouija, Ouija, are you here?" Then nothing. I rolled my eyes and told her something like, "Girl, there's nothing happening. This is all BS." As I was saying that, the planchette started to move very slowly to yes. I laughed at her, told her I knew she was moving it and to cut it out. She said she wasn't, and to prove it to me she closed her eyes and turned her whole upper body in the opposite direction to the board, in a way that it was impossible for her to actually see anything, and even if her eyes were open there were no mirrors. I asked what my name was, and the planchette spelled my name, but not completely, like if my name were Maggie it would spell Magui, but no E. I even said out loud, "Then," waiting for it to move to complete the proper spelling of my name, but it didn't happen. So it couldn't have been me who was moving it either. Anyway, my cousin turned back to me and we started discussing what we should ask the spirit. I blurted out, "How did you die?" and my cousin started to yell at me that I shouldn't ask that question. I asked her why not, and as we're talking I felt the board move again. We looked down and it spelled K-I-L, and then it was heading back to L, and we started yelling and ran back upstairs, and never said goodbye, at least I didn't. I became terrified after that. I felt like something was following me. It lasted months, and then I guess I sort of got used to it. However, I have been having chronic nightmares since about that time. I'm 30 now. Chronic pain started to show up in my early teenage years. My relationships with people became more difficult. Now maybe I'm just anxious, but recently I've been wondering if maybe I messed something up, and the entity has stuck to me. Can I close this door without a board?
My name is Joseph, and I used to live in an old part of Folsom, California. My neighborhood friends were Rob, Kristen, and Robin. I was on Natoma Street, and they were on Sibley, Figueroa, and Reading Streets. Folsom's been around for ages. It used to be a mining town. Gold coming down from Placer, El Dorado, and Amador would pass through on its way to San Francisco. So, there's a lot of old churches and cemeteries on this side of town, and it's not uncommon to find bones while digging in your yard. Rob lived on Sibley, and I on Natoma. Where these streets meet, there are churches and cemeteries, and a small park in front of Rob's house where we'd kick it. At the time, Rob was dating Kristen, and I had an eye for her friend Robin, which never panned out, but we still hung out as friends. This is what happened to us one night while we were hanging out in the graveyard. We walked down Natoma and crossed Folsom Boulevard to hang out in the cemetery where Rob had seen a tombstone with a motorcycle engraving. He had the most wonderful idea of whipping out a Ouija board and trying to talk to the guy. I always thought these things were bullshit. It says Parker Bros on the box, so to me, it's about as scary as a game of Monopoly. That night, the weather wasn't great, but not too bad. Cloudy with a breeze. It took forever to get the candles lit. We all had to open our jackets and huddle up to keep the wind off the lighter. So, it's set up on the guy's tombstone. Candles for effect, and we begin. Stupid questions, giggles, hey, I know you're moving it. Nobody is taking this seriously. Until the weirdness starts. First, the wind picks up, but the candles don't go out. Easy enough. Trick candles. The ones for birthday cakes that are tough to blow out. They weren't those. Then the rain. It begins to drizzle, but the board isn't getting wet. Easy enough. The board is laminated or coated in wax. But it wasn't that. Raindrops didn't land on the board. We're starting to get pelted by raindrops, and the board is dry and the candles are still. I wish that was the end of it. I'm scared, the girls are scared, and Rob couldn't be more excited. Then, somebody says, "What's that?" There are lights at the cemetery, kind of like street lights, along the fence and driveway, and we could see something moving about 50 to 60 yards away. A silhouette, a shadow, moving from tree to tree to tree, getting closer. It moved really fast. At about 30 yards, it passed under a light, and we could see it was just a blob of black, and we all ran. Rob's fastest. I'm behind the girls, keeping that thing over my shoulder, following the star on Rob's starter jacket. We're running in the dark, between tombstones and trees, making our way to the front gate when I feel something grab my leg. It was the chain that ran along the top of the post of the driveway, but I thought it had me when I looked to the front to see where I was going. I broke the chain and it wrapped around my leg. I ran across Folsom Boulevard with one of the posts still attached, and when I stopped to pull it off, I realized that I'd pissed myself. I don't remember if we met up at the park or if I just ran all the way home. I'm just glad that thing didn't cross the street. I'm sure for them, that was it. But it didn't end for me. I ruined a pair of jeans that I'd have to explain. I had a deep bruise around my throat that I'd have to explain. But what I couldn't explain was the damn Ouija board in my room. We ran. I didn't go back for it, and neither did they. I'm shitting myself because it's sitting on my bed. I would rather get caught with a dime bag or a porno than this thing. Shit like this is totally forbidden in my house. And now I have to hide it until garbage day. I took all the garbage bags out of the can and put it on the bottom and stacked the bags on top. Job done. Nope. At some point, it's back in my room. We had a cord of firewood on the side of the house, so I wedged it in tight and stacked logs on top. Totally hidden till garbage day, and I managed to get it in the can before anyone could notice. Nope. Again, it's back, and I'll still be terrified. I threw it in a field, hid it at a friend's house, and it kept coming back. My last attempt to get rid of it worked. I took my nan's rosary and a few things precious to me, but worth it. I buried it in the graveyard of the old church down the street and said out loud, "This is holy ground, and if anyone can hear me, please, keep this thing away from me." I don't know if it stayed put, but it never came back to me. I'm still fearful of these things. When I'm watching paranormal shows on TV, I'll fast forward or skip an episode because I don't even want the image of one on my TV. Since then, I've seen shit that'll make your hair fall out and fracture your sense of self or just break your soul.
Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I do hope you enjoyed tonight's stories, and I'd like to give an extra special thanks to Jordan for joining me in tonight's video. If you appreciated his voice and his work, you can follow the link down below and on screen shortly to see more from him. Just for those of you who might have missed yesterday, I have been trying to help out all of the creators affected by the recent demonetization wave. Jordan was one of those affected, and he did get his monetization back, thankfully, and so I'm just trying to give them a bit of a leg up during this difficult time. So, if you wanted to support them, that would be great. But all the same, I will be back tomorrow with some paranormal stories featuring Raven Reads. I look forward to seeing you there. And I would like to give one extra special thank you to my members and patrons, whose names you could see on screen, for their incredible support. You get a bunch of cool perks, not this week though, because of the week-long content bonanza, but coming next week, you'll get a bunch of cool stuff for joining the program. But that is it from me, guys. Stay awesome, and good night.